All right, NAI football fans, this is Corey Thorpe back with another edition of the NAIFBALL Podcast, and we go from cold Nixa, Missouri down to warm and sunny South Florida, where the only thing you've got to worry about when it gets cold is lizards raining from the sky. We've got the new head coach of the St. Thomas Bobcats, Drew Davis, on this afternoon. Coach Davis, how's it going?
Corey, doing well. I appreciate you having me on today. I'm grateful for the opportunity and looking forward to it.
So you've been down here for you said 3 years now. Have you seen the falling lizard phenomenon?
I have, and ironically enough, we have, kind of a place on campus that there's, a pond, with an area where students go to hang out. It's kind of near our quad area, and surprisingly, the iguanas like to hang out in that area. And when you catch a day that's, low 50s, mid 50s, there's times where you got to kind of cover your head. You might catch a fallen iguana or see one laid out on the sidewalk that's not moving.
Oh man! And if it's over a pond, you might. Oh boy, that might be reptilicide there as he falls into the water and drowns. Oh dear.
No question. No question.
Well, Coach, it was one of the funnier exchanges a few weeks ago as news broke that Coach Reichel was stepping down as his role from the head coach of the football program to just be athletic director. So here's how when we post the news out to our guys on Discord. Post the picture and everything. About an hour later, come back on and go, hey, guess what, guys? They've heard someone. There weren't any discussions beforehand, I imagine, but that was I think that was the fastest coaching change I have ever seen in my life. Take me a little bit behind the curtain on the discussions and how that went behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it was a quick and it was, a thorough process, but I don't think that there's as much to it as you believe in terms of things in the works or, in the ground making. And, just from, my perspective and my point of view, which is kind of the only account that I can attest for, on December 12th, I think, which was a Friday, we were in here working businesses as normal, ciphering through the transfer portal and, making recruiting calls. And I had a conversation with Coach Reichel later in the afternoon, and that was the first point in time that he had kind of, opened up and let me know about conversations that he had had, and ultimately, decisions and thoughts that he was weighing, and kind of the direction that it was headed. And, by the end of our conversation, I left there knowing that, I was going to have an opportunity and a chance to interview for the head coaching position. And from then, I didn't know, parameters or I didn't know, who else necessarily was involved. But, I knew that it was an opportunity that, I've worked for, I've prayed for, I'm grateful and humble for the opportunity. But, it was a surprise, I guess, per se, on my behalf. And, that's one of those things where, as a coach, you're always evolving, you're always growing, you're always working towards, getting to a certain goal, not knowing when, that time might present itself. So there wasn't necessarily a plan. It was pretty rapid. And, from that Friday of me being told that I was going to have a chance to interview for the head coaching position, I had a couple of days to prepare. And then I interviewed on Friday the 18th. And, I interviewed with the president and, obviously, both him and, Reichel were involved, in the interviews and the decisions and whatnot. But I interviewed on that Friday. And then, that weekend, Sunday night, I got a call from Reichel, and we had, some quick conversations, which kind of led me to believe that I've got a chance. You know what I mean? I've got a chance. And then, coming to work on Monday and getting a chance to see everybody, obviously I knew it was kind of headed towards that direction. And I don't think it was announced until maybe the 18th on that Thursday. But probably about 24 hours or 48 hours out, I kind of did have, a little bit of an insight that, it was going to head towards that direction.
It is super cool to see that just from the continuity standpoint. There's no, you see some programs that, the position's been open for a while. Um, we see, right now Rockies still got theirs open as far as I know. Arizona Christians just named theirs a couple days ago. Um, that one had been open for a while, but to see that really does help in recruiting. You're not losing any momentum whatsoever. Let's take a look back then here at last season. It's a good season for St. Thomas. You fall short of the ultimate goal, obviously, but um, it is any time when you are a top 20 team in the country, have a shot at the Red Banners, is a fairly decent season for you. You start off 2-1 in the out of conference schedule against, well, one team that made the playoffs and one team that we had projected at the last minute to make the playoffs and didn't. And that in Georgetown, you come away with a win there. But talk me through your out of conference and how you felt coming out.
Yeah, even dating back to preseason, we knew that we were going to have an opportunity to play some, obviously elite football teams and, test our, team against, some quality opponents, both at home and on the road. So, prior to us starting and getting into conference play, we felt good about knowing about the quality of opponent that we were going to face. And ultimately, during that time, trying to find out, a little bit who we are as a football team and kind of where we were going to head as a team. And obviously the out of conference schedule was split. Obviously with Lindsey Wilson and Carroll. Obviously losing both of those games. The first road test I think up at Lindsey Wilson was a wake up call to us, in the sense of we did not play our best football on all three phases. The kids knew it, the coaches knew it. But at the end of the day, we had a challenge that we had to come back and we had to prepare to, put our best foot forward and play our best football and continuously get better, hoping, anticipating for an opportunity to find ourselves, in a chance to be able to make postseason. And after being here 2 or 3 years, Corey, and finding out that, sometimes when we can, take our talents on the road to test ourselves, early in the season, that, it's good for the program, it's good for the kids to get, obviously, more importantly, a quality opponent, but have to travel, have to, take into account of playing on the road and before you hit conference play of trying to, see how your team's going to face in the face of adversity.
You then pick up a couple W's there, one at home, one on the road to open up Sun Conference play. But then the schedule maker does you no favors there, right in smack dab in the middle of your schedule, back-to-back weeks playing at Kaiser and at home against Southeastern. Unfortunately, you go 0-2 through that, and I gotta imagine that at that point you go, oh, the Sun. Well, one, the Sun is now out of our grasp, but the playoffs might also be out of our grasp. Talk to me about rallying the troops and setting off for that back half of the season.
Yeah, no, obviously dropping both of those games back to back, was, disappointing. And, both of those games, were challenges and tests for us as a program. But, it was, a challenge for the kids because we had two decisions. We could quit and pack it in, or we could strap it up and face adversity head on and run towards the flame and run towards the fire. And, fortunate and thankfully, the kids elected to do the latter. And, we were able to continuously get better throughout the, back half of the season and, find a way to be able to string some wins together and build some momentum, Corey, heading into not knowing if we were going to have a chance, to qualify and make postseason. But we kept, harping to our kids, the worst thing in the world would be if we mess around and end up getting a chance to get into the playoffs or the postseason, and we aren't attacking this with the mindset that we're building forward for that opportunity. We're not going to be in a position to be able to do what we need to do given that opportunity. And, fortunate for us, even with the amount of losses that we had, 3 losses, which, me being in the NAI football and in the Sun Conference over the last 3.5 years, like, you wouldn't think there's a chance that you're going to get into the postseason potentially with 3 losses. But, obviously quality of the opponents that we faced, and some of the games that we were able to obviously show our skill set and show our ability, played a good hand into us being able to make the postseason.
And one of those teams that definitely did y'all a solid and was able to be a great win on your record going into the postseason was Florida Memorial. They had defeated Southeastern to kind of drop them back into the field a little bit, and y'all are able to take care of them at home in the Battle for Miami Gardens there. Big one there, senior day, faculty and staff appreciation, and the Battle for Miami Gardens. You emerge victorious from that one. But then you move on. You have to go from sunny Florida to Helena, Montana, and that's it's a little different climate there. And obviously, unfortunately, that's where your season comes to an end. And it seems to me that, especially in those last 2 weeks, the bend but don't break defense might have broken a little bit too much.
And fortunate for us, we had been to Carroll before, Corey, and so although we were making the cross country trek, although we were, getting into another, environment, we had some familiarity at least with the travel, what to expect, the hotel situation, obviously the locker room, the stadium, so some of that, was able to kind of, provide some fluidity and confidence in our kids of knowing that we've been there and we've been to that, location. But, we didn't play our best football, and we had opportunities, and it wasn't, necessarily defensively. There were some obvious, plays that, did, on, whether it's the 3rd and 20 or, the play before half to give them the Hail Mary, prior to, getting into halftime that, you look back on and, they don't help. But on all three phases, we made enough, mistakes and critical errors, at inopportune times where it was too much to overcome.
So, looking forward to your team next year, there's a couple of offensive places where you're going to have to replace a few people here. Um, right now, it's still one. It is January 6th, and everything is still up in the air. So, we'll do our best at this point, but there's still a lot of fluidity, as we've said the last couple of weeks. So everything that we're going to talk about is going to be stuff that we know, and we'll do our best from there, and we'll get you an update once the Sun Conference preview comes out in what's that going to be like, July. So on offense, right now, you've got some holes to fill, whether that's going to be at your signal caller position. There's a couple of wideouts, especially David Hayes, that you're going to miss. That guy was a dude for you. The big bright spot is Isaiah Lopez at the running back position. I don't know that you're able to, fully replace Saquon Jean-Pierre and Rontavious Farmer, especially Farmer, at that running back position. But Isaiah Lopez did a fairly good job filling in and able to take it and be a good stud in that running back room.
Yeah, and honestly, Corey, I can't say enough about the young man just in terms of we acquired him late in the summer. He was a late add. He was a transfer from NAU, Northern Arizona University. So, he's a guy that had seen, some higher level of football. He had obviously been in an organization in which, knew the expectations. And, for him, he was looking for an opportunity to be able to showcase his skill set and be able to get, a bulk of the carries. And, the young man did a phenomenal job coming in, buying into our culture, buying into our process, and working himself obviously into a starting role. And he ran for 582 yards and 8 touchdowns. And to be honest, Corey, he did that banged up. There were a couple weeks where he was limited. Barely had some carries here or there. So he's scratching the surface, in my opinion, of what he can do here, at the running back position. And, as he continues to grow, mature, and acclimate, I think his best football is still out in front of him.
On the defensive side, you've got a lot coming back, about 75% right now, just on my terrible math, of your guys that registered at least 10 tackles last year are at
Right.
least, freshman, sophomore, junior. And you're bringing back most of your defensive line, headlined by Trevon Williams, A majority of your linebackers headlined by Zach Marino, and about 70% of your DBs headlined by Keon Martin there. And also Jerome Mitchell being a really good guy for you there. 4 interceptions, 6 PBUs, and electric there with a kick return touchdown as well. Talk to me about getting that defense even better in 26.
Yeah, obviously they, have a knack for the football, and a couple of those guys on the back end truly, they have an eye and a nose for the football. And Jerome Mitchell's a kid who, he's a football guy. He's a junkie, and he's competitive throughout the week at practice. And what you see on Saturdays is what we see, Monday through Friday. And for him, obviously, to be returning and also be, the Sun Conference DB returner of the year, that's imperative. That's important, because, he's going to provide, not only, some leadership and some leeway for the guys underneath him, that are young at his position group. But, for us as a defense returning, a valuable asset that has played a significant amount of football that contributes at a high level. That's a huge piece, especially for me going into the first year, of being a head coach, bringing a guy like Jerome back, bringing a guy like Zach Marino back, bringing, the D line, Vincent Burge, Trayvon Williams, and then adding some youth, that we're excited about in that room as this offseason cycle ramps up and as spring football begins. I'm really excited about the core nucleus of our defense.
So, looking around at the Sun Conference, it is definitely, obviously, Kaiser's been to the national championship for 4 straight darn seasons now. They are the elephant in the room. Um, as many Snyder marks as I get, that sometimes I pick against Kaiser. They're quick to remind me that I am wrong, and that's okay because sometimes I'm wrong. But looking at the bigger picture, what's a team in the Sun that as y'all played them this year, you went, oh man, they're young, but they could be a problem on down the line.
Yeah, first of all, being in the Sun Conference now 3 years, I've gotten a chance to see a large majority of these teams on a calendar basis. And what I will say about the Sun Conference as a whole is watching this conference from 3 years ago to where we finished this year, the quality of the football that's being played is dramatically improving at a rapid rate. And all you have to do is look at the stats, whether it's Florida Memorial leading in rushing, whether it's and at the end of the day, for us, that's great. When your conference is having success and the teams in your conference are going out and they're beating other teams in other conferences that maybe in years past they hadn't been, like now that's improving the quality of our conference, the quality of our opponents. And, for me, Corey, I truly believe the Sun Conference is obviously one of the best, if not, in NAIA football from week to week, who you see and, the type of, athletes and coaches that we face on a weekly basis.
Yeah, it is. It is scary. I mean, watching the rise of Florida Memorial, Weber has been quite good over the last couple of seasons. Ave is not a place you ever want to play at night, and they they have a tendency to bite you in the butt when you don't expect it. It's not a fun team to play at all. So the resurgence of Southeastern to me
Yep.
is that I have been saying for years now, if Southeastern can ever get it back going, that is a sleeping giant of a team. They finally got it back going in the right direction, and I am pleased as punch that you have a true 3 and 4 way battle for the top of the Sun. Because look, there was no way, 4 years ago that Kaiser deserved a 12 seed and came back
Right.
and gets to the national championship game. It's because the Sun Conference was looked down upon. Because of what Kaiser's done, the rest of the Sun looks a whole lot better, and they've played a whole lot better. They've played up to it. I mean, Kaiser ended up in some of those games looking just a shade mortal. Um, and that's due to that depth there. But I do love watching that parity grow. So
Yeah. No, and you hit it on the head. I mean, right now, currently, for anybody in the Sun Conference, all roads lead through West Palm Beach,
Yep.
and they've done a phenomenal job and, the upbringing and the uprising of their program. And then now consistently being able to put a product on the field that competes year in and year out. And now everybody else in the Sun Conference is chasing that same, model and that same mentality.
So, Coach, as you go into your first season with the HC in front of your name, what area of your program, whether it's something on the field or off the field, are you really looking to focus and home in on in 2026?
First and foremost, what I want these kids to do is develop a level of physicality and a level of toughness. And now being in the Sun Conference and being in NAI football the last 3 years and seeing what it takes to compete year in and year out in your conference, and then compete in the postseason and some of the conferences and some of the teams and some of the brands of football that you have to play late in the postseason. There is no sugarcoating it. You have to be a physical team on both sides of the football, and you have to control both lines of scrimmage. And, that's going to be my emphasis and my goal coming in, is build this thing fundamentally, technically, but we are going to hone in on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and we are going to look to dominate the line of scrimmage, because it's my true, honest belief, Corey, that games are won and lost up front. And, if you can do that at this level, there's no doubt that, we can provide enough skill positions and enough speed to be able to, play on the perimeter. But, we've got to be able to establish a level of physicality and dominance up front, because if you watch the NFL, if you watch the playoffs right now in major college football, a lot of these teams that are making it and making runs deep late in the postseason can run the football, can stop the run, and there's no secret, in the recipe. And so we've got to build and we've got to work towards getting that in our DNA.
I mean, heck, you saw it in that Indiana-Alabama game. I mean, Alabama just could not run the ball for if their lives depended on it all year long. Um, Crap, they lost to a terrible Florida State team, which is terrible enough. But Indiana's able to run the football, is able to stop the run, and a Crimson Tide team that is like culturally in their DNA, they weren't able to, which was absolutely nuts.
No question. And, even obviously locally for us, Miami being right down the road and
Yeah.
us having a lot of familiarity with guys over there. And, I know a couple guys on the staff there where I think personally they've done a tremendous job over the last 2.5 to 3 years in terms of, rearranging how they do things up front. And now they're winning games because they're kicking people's ass at the line of scrimmage and they're running the ball to win the game. And, I think that that's imperative, and there's no, surprise in why they're making a run, right now, and one of the last four teams remaining.
Love to hear it. I am that is to be fair, my favorite brand of football is run the ball and stop the run. It is the most fun to watch because it is the most frustrating for the opposing team. Well, Coach, thanks for taking some time out this afternoon to come and chat with us. We are so looking forward to watching the Sun unfold over the next year. And, obviously, we've got flag to go before that. Super excited for that. But won't be long before we get some thudding and pad hitting in the late summer.
Absolutely, no, without a doubt. And Corey, thank you for the opportunity. It was a pleasure to join you today, and I look forward to being able to stay in touch.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the NAIAFBALL Podcast. Thanks to our sponsors, the Headset app, who are your go-to guys for game day communications for any sport. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to the podcast and our YouTube channel, and leave us a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. As always, if you'd like to support what we do, head over to patreon.com/NAIAFBall and become a patron. We can't do what we do without our sponsor and listeners like you.